Greetings, Summoners. Cosmic here, and today we have the white review for Set 1 Battle Spirit Saga, or History of Dawn. And just like the other videos, we have all the vanillas up front, then we're going to talk about archetypes, and then get into the individual cards themselves. So this will be a little bit of a longer video, but trying to put this all together. And the thing I want to start with up front is, this is certainly a color that needs a lot more testing to really see how it all comes together. So I am going to be maybe a little bit harsher on this color than I have for the other ones, because the other decks, even just sleeving them up and playing them once, you can really start to see where the power comes from, where white is meant to be more of this dirtily, stall to the late game color, which is supposed to be the king and, turn 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, like the longer the game goes, right? And it really struggles in the couple of builds that I've done so far. So take that with a grain of salt, but as always, here's all the vanillas. Same disclaimer, now that we've kind of seen where the sets are going and how the cards have been designed. Vanillas are cool if you really want to play into those themes, like you really just want to have all mechas or you really just want to have all machine beasts. The 2-drop, 2 reduction mecha is good if you want to try to do something with DMDD and go like the aggressive route and have a bunch of unblockable stuff and swing for game and that stuff. That I think is more niche and we won't really see that. I think most decks, what we're going to see in like Vegas and otherwise and later, is really going to be focused on let's just have these cards with additional effects, and then leave Mech Lord for the late game, where you set up a board that just has a couple unblockable attackers and hope they don't have ice shields. So there's all the vanillas. Just going to skip past them and just kind of go into the main point of it and get into the archetypes themselves. So here's where I would normally say, like, hey, here's a bunch of cool different things that the color does, and here's like their very different themes, right? With red, you have the access to like the mid-range and the cool combo stuff that Star Dragons can do, versus the Pterosaurs and Emperor Beasts, which have like these aggressive lines you can take and slam down a Rex on the board with Confront. Purple has a lot of options that you can do, actually. The more I tested, the more options I find, where it's like you can do a Snake Tribal thing, you can do Depletion, you can do Curse, you can just do a purple good range stuff, you can splash some other colors to get in some other options as well. Like there's so much. Purple just has a lot it can do. Shadows, there we go, that's the other one I was trying to think of. Like Shadows is like borderline real deck, surprisingly, which is like, it's a subtype of Curse, I guess, so like whatever, but there's still like another variation if you could do it. Like all those play at different speeds and kind of have their own different things you can do. And then here's white, like dual gun Mech Lord, like I mentioned, is kind of like, hey, this might be a cool aggressive strategy. And yes, I might just be biased because I've been playing a lot of Curse lately, because I think it's a really good deck. And his secondary effects, so during either attack step, right, you could just keep him on the board as a permanent blocker. The downside is it's going to trigger their Blood Curse, so you might bleed out that way anyways. But he is, again, a card that you want to survive to the late game. It's going to have good matchup X, Y, and Z, and it's really good in these scenarios. And then, oh, hey, we have Armored Dragon Ship Enterprise. Oh, it's a late game card. Oh, it's really good against these matchups. Oh, it stalls the game until you do this. And then we have Turbo Rex, who wants to force your opponents to attack so they can't have a bunch of cost reduction to help you get to the late game, to help you get to Elk, or to help you get to Enterprise, right? Like, it's obviously you can't play all of these in the same deck because your top end would just be atrocious. But a lot of these just feel the same. And in white, in my testing, and again, very limited testing very early on, obviously, as I'm having to record this before I can set up like really dedicated sessions. But white has really felt like, okay, these are really great magic cards, and these are really great sideboarding cards, and I really love this mecha that can bounce all 3K BPs. I'm never playing it main deck because you just can't. And it has all these like very narrow and focused abilities. It just feels bad. And I think this is, again, where it goes to, I just need to have more time with this color, because once you figure out what kind of that early and mid game looks like, and you figure out how on earth you're going to fix their horrible draw engine, like every other color can successfully and consistently draw a bunch of cards, splashing red or not, right? I tried Volcanic Canyon in the couple of white decks that I was testing. It felt awful. Like, yes, filtering was nice, but the problem is you just still run out of cards. So, the next deck I'm going to build has some purple options that I'm splashing because depths have been insane. So at least for right now, and again, I kind of apologize because it's my own just lack of time to test, but white really does feel like it's just nothing's unique. It's just everything kind of wants to be doing similar things. And especially with like Buffalong Bill, right, as we talked about in the white starter deck, it was really like, okay, well, here's now something where they can all block, and then like one turn you get to be aggressive because you get to activate his level 3 effect. You get a bunch of bounce effects, and that's cool. But then we have stuff like Combo Nova, which is just going to blow up your board before you ever get to that stage being relevant. So it's really interesting to see where this is going to line up. At least right now, Elk is by far my favorite X-Rare because of the absolute immunity that it has on block. You have the Nexus that can bring it up to 11k, which is going to help shut out everything your opponent could throw at it. And Suppression is a very real card that we're going to talk about later. So Elk is like, if I'm going to be dirtling out to the game and I just want an immortal threat, assuming that my Nexus can stay on the board and stuff, and because it's a late game, we're going to have a billion cores anyways, like Elk has felt the best. I really like probably Turbo Rex after that because it plays into that more attrition strategy and making sure your opponent doesn't have a lot of stuff on board, but then you need more on block effects. So again, I think there's a lot of very similar things that you're going to be doing regardless of which X rare you are ultimately going to pick. So I guess the good thing that I'll add here is that it's very much a, hey, I just want to play a bunch of mecha dudes and here's some good white cards that go with them, right? Like any one of these you can realistically play, build a deck towards, and they're going to share very similar cards. So if you are someone who likes the games normally going long and playing to the late game, you know, buy 2 of the white starter decks, buy a color split in white, and you'll have a bunch of different options that you can kind of shuffle through and sideboard through. And what's funny too is like all of these are technically also great sideboarding options. Like sideboard's probably gonna be largely reserved for like burst cards and other things you can splash and get more value out of. But like, again, so Dual Gun Mech Lord can be really good against Curse in a pinch. The Enterprise armor doesn't stop Curse, and his block effect can be pretty chunky. Like, yes, it's a 12k, you know, beef, or 13k if you have the Nexus because it's all spirits. So like that can give you, if your opponent's going tall and playing other control strategies, sometimes just having a 13k blocker is good enough against, let's say, like the Gigano Rex deck, right? And then Turbo Rex, if they're playing yellow, okay, yellow, you want to break up their board. Yes, they're going to keep shuffling through their deck, but as long as you can keep down the number of threats that they're going to be having, or if they play like a Freezatol and then their Freezatol attacks into your Turbo Rex, that's great. That is like the card you want them to lose. So each one of these can like target different things. So in that case, like white has the best sideboarding options, and I'm glad that we have sideboard now so that white can have a shot. But you know, probably a month from now, I'm gonna be eating these words anyways, because I've just, again, the very early testing, I've just not been impressed with, especially going from a lot of red testing, a lot of really cool, unique things they can do, felt very strong. Going into purple, Curse just feels insane. The Nexus cards in purple are insane. The magic is really good. Like the lower battle power, you know, stinks, but if you have like Curse or other ways to get around it, there's a lot of stuff you can do. And then I played white, but that's enough going on about like the archetype issue, as I'm going to call it for now. And we'll see what this looks like again a month from now once more testing gets in. Obviously, I'm going to have gameplay videos. Like this is literally the first color that I'm working on because I want to be wrong. I want to like eat these words in no longer than a week from now because I feel like there has to be something more here, because Bandai wouldn't just do that. So, you know, that's an on me thing. So over the next week, I'm going to be testing a lot of white while waiting for yellow spoilers. And hopefully I have good news. So look forward to a video on that, you know, in the near future. But let's finally talk about Dual Gun Mech Lord Durm Dyna. 7 cost, 4 reduction. So 4 reduction is very nice to see here, just to help get your resources, you know, spread out, reward you for getting more Nexuses in play, which is what he wants to be doing anyway. So the cost reduction plays in very well for that. But when the spirit attacks, play the spirit's soul core to select one of your white spirits for each Nexus either player controls. It cannot be blocked. So it's important to note that this does require you to have multiple white spirits on board. So this can't be a splash option, and you want to be playing a lot of Nexus cards. And I will say later on, like the Infinite Mothership or the Mecha, I want to call it the Mecha Nexus because obviously the secondary condition cares about Mecha, but it's just a very good card for white anyways. Kind of builds into that. So this secondary effect, during either attack step, when the spirit would be destroyed by your opponent's effect, you may pay a core to keep it on the field refreshed. So 2 really important things here is it doesn't say a core from this spirit, and it says refresh. So this is actually a multi-blocker or multi-attacker built in, which is pretty exciting for white. But then again, if you're paying the soul core, he's going to be unblockable anyways, and you don't care. Like, yes, the argument there is then it gets around like Nova because it's during the attack step. He would have 10k, you pay the core. He gets to stay on board. So like it's good for that side of things. But again, it's a nice resilient threat. I like the unblockable part, but it's more of like you don't really care for that secondary part. It's more of like a persisting effect where if you're going to end the game with this, it's going to be because of the soul core on it. So again, all these X rares I feel kind of very in the middle on because they all seem to have like a secondary, like, oh, I want to grind down to this spot. And obviously Durm Dyna here has the ability to close out the game by having unblockable. But again, if we see something like an Ice Shield, or if they just bounce one of your spirits, it's going to stop the attack, and it can feel pretty bad to have to replay this guy. So love the card. Again, very strong for both of these effects. It's a very solid card for white to have options to in set 1, but I haven't seen or haven't been able to build enough of a deck kind of beyond him where it's just like, oh, it's just generic white good stuff, and it's not mechas that are doing it. It's just like, okay, here's a couple unblockable guys. Unblockable is good in every card game ever, right? So cool, it does that thing. And, you know, maybe that's all that you really care about for white and all we really need. Moving on then from there, we have Fortress God Knight Odin type X. Really love this dude. 5 costs for reduction during an opponent's attack step if you control a white Nexus. So again, does help play into Durham Dyna's effect. Refresh the spirit at the start of step. So again, this is something that you can attack with, be a little bit more aggressive, maybe chip away an early life, and then it's going to restand itself. But when the spirit attacks or blocks, you actually get to bounce a 3 cost or fewer to its owner's hand. It does say opponent, so you can't like get value out of your own on summon effects like Ear, which is, you know, fair, I guess, because you wouldn't want to just be able to get that free ramp every single turn. That might be too good, I guess, for white, but it does help play into that strategy of, okay, we want to either clear a 3 cost or lower problematic blocker that our opponent might have and just to chip in the damage, or just force your opponent to have an awkward block. Now, it does only get up to 5k at level 2 or 7k at level 3, so that does leave a little bit to be desired because it's just not hitting quite the right numbers that we would hope for, right? Because like Volcanic Break and things like that could hit this pretty easily, but you know, 5 cores is also a lot unless it's the late game and or you've had a bit of ramp. So this is a very solid card. I have loved this one so far in testing because every deck plays a 3 cost, and most of the time they're going to have a 3 cost you want to bounce anyways. And especially something like the Curse deck, right? So if you're playing against Curse, you can bounce their threat before it goes to the showdown step, or again, whatever the official wording is, so Curse doesn't trigger. So it's a very problematic blocker for your opponent, and then late game, if you can give it armor through Enterprise, then it's going to stick around quite well. So really did love Odin type X so far in testing. I think it's a very solid card. This is kind of the one that I've hinted at for the feels just too sideboardy for my care. So 6 cost reduction, Sky Dragon Lord Platinum. So when summoned, this is the only effect that it has at 1, 2, or 3. Return all spirits 3,000 or fewer BP to their owner's hand. So interesting. This one does allow you to rebuy some of those on-play ramp effects or other things that white might get access to later. So that's kind of nice. Or if you want to like loop a Mechatrice, that can be really nice. But again, this is one of those things like 3,000 or fewer says, okay, I'm either playing against Curse or I'm playing against like the yellow 2 cost Rush. And maybe I'm hitting a couple other things. Like I was using this as a one of, just like, okay, let's see how much this actually comes up and how much that's going to matter. Like I love this card out of the sideboard. I think it'll be absolutely great for that. But main deck, it kind of felt like, it's not doing exactly what I would hope. Like the best thing you're doing is like, oh, I bounce one of their guys, but I bounce like 2 of my ears. Like I'm just using that example a lot because it's like, you know, on play ramp more. You can get that back multiple times, but then you're leaving yourself with less defense if you don't have the cores to just replay them right away. So it was an interesting card. I really do love it. Get out of the sideboard. I think it's absolutely going to be a house there, but from the card itself, from like, oh, I'm always excited to play this in my main, you know, my main 50, not so much, at least for right now. Again, if you know the meta is shaping to be heavy aggro, then then obviously it's a main deck consideration. Another card that I absolutely loved, that was, did some spice. 4 cost, 2 reduction, Gun Knight Heavy Barrel. When destroyed by an opponent. And what's important about this is it is not a level-based effect. This is just a static effect. So if you're playing against purple and they, you know, Dark King Snake kill this guy, which they wouldn't do because as I'm about to explain, you get to tuck one of their opponents with a when summoned effect. So spoiler, like Dark King Snake, you get to put it right on the bottom of the deck. What's also interesting is it just says select. So when it's just destroyed, this could be through Deadly Balance. It could be through other things. So leaving this just on the board as a threat for your opponent, just like, hey, this is a 3K blocker. You have to answer at some point. It's not a conditional like tuck either. It's just any spirit with a when summoned effect and put on the bottom of the deck. Like that's Nova. That's going to be Dark King Snake. That's going to be, I'm sure, some stuff in yellow that we're going to see. Obviously, there's going to be some stuff in white that you might just want to get rid of as well. Like this card does quite a lot. And then obviously, as we're going to talk about later, it's also a mecha. Comes down the mid game, can help you kind of stall out to get other resources down, helps play into your Nexus strategy, forces your opponent to maybe take a couple turns off to dig for removal so they can finally kill this guy or confront it, or, you know, depending on what color they're playing, and then get to deploy their threat that they want to deploy. So I love this card for white. I think at least for right now, and I know we don't have a lot of yellow yet, so it might be a little preemptive to say it, but almost every single deck is going to have at least one summon type effect that you're going to want to hit that spirit to get value out of. So again, this forces them to not only either attack with it first, or if they try to leave it back, right, you can just throw this guy in front of the bus, bounce their guy to the bottom of the deck, and you're still feeling good. So Gun Knight Heavy Barrel, definitely one that I might just try to snipe foils for, because I think it's just a very solid card. Again, the fact that it's not a level 1 requirement or something, so it can play into like the core depletion strategies and still trigger, I think that's very, very good. Another one that I really liked because of Infinite Mothership was Heavy Tank Curiosity. Does require 2 cores. That is kind of the important part, but it's an early 3-drop, right? Good cost reduction, counts for your symbols, like all that seems fine. But then when your mecha spirits would be destroyed by your opponent's destruction effects, they remain on the field exhausted. So this is going to count for things like, you know, Andromeda or the various landmine, I don't know, like a very anti-red. So this is where it kind of got a little bit muddy. And sorry, obviously curse, right? So this is where it gets a little bit muddy, where it says like, okay, well, I'm going to have this, you know, 4,000 blocker if I want, which can help just kind of clog up the board at times. 4,000 is not that exciting. But another one where it's early enough, so I was keeping in my decks because I want to trigger Infinite Mothership more consistently, and it was good for that. But another card too, if your opponent's not playing a lot of destruction-based effects, and maybe you want to substitute for more of the armors that you can play, this is another card that you can come out. But definitely one of my I guess the truth of it really is, right, there's not a lot of good early mechas that you can play other than the vanillas. So you're kind of forced to play these mechas, whether you like it or not, assuming you're playing Infinite Mothership, because that Nexus has been very, very good in testing so far. So that is a consideration you have to make. If you have Mothership, you're probably playing this. If you don't, you can probably play one of the many 3-drops that white has access to. Getting into more expensive stuff, 5 cost of 2 reduction, Type 90 Tank Mobile. It does have armor, red, white, and then at level 2, it does add purple for its armor cost as well. So it's interesting, again, at the time of recording and based on what's available as the written text on cards, armor purple does not stop things like curse. So yes, it's a 6k blocker who is going to be able to dodge a bunch of destruction-based or core depletion effects out of purple. But if they have a single curse unit, it is still dying. So again, this is one of those things, it's like a really good, you know, sideboarding type of option, getting a bit more narrow, but kind of like really getting in the weeds of it. Technically, it's a very good anti-white card as well if you're trying to play into Durm Dyna, because it has protection for white, so they can't bounce it, and you can make it unblockable through his effect, right? So it's going to be interesting to see, like, okay, if there's a white heavy meta for some reason, just to try to cut out their answers that they would have from your unblockable. Again, other than Ice Shield, you could play a couple of these because, you know, it's a little bit expensive, but even at level 1, having armor against red and white does cut out a lot of the answers that your opponent is probably sideboarding in. So a little bit of a meta call, but definitely has its use, even if limited, you know, otherwise maybe not that exciting, but it does have some kind of niche cases where it can find a home. And then we have one of our X-rares that we mentioned, Dinosaur Harrier Turbo Rex, 6 cost 3 reduction, but it does have an ascend cost of 3 cost or more. And this one did bum me out. So again, it doesn't have the condition of it has to be a white spirit. It is just any spirit 3 or more. So this is where you might get interesting with some of the splash cards. If they have like what's the 3 cost serpent that has an on when summon, you can pay the soul core, draw a card, and then you can sacrifice that to this guy and probably not care. That's fine, but it does feel a little bit bad when white struggles already to have this card draw engine for it, and now I'm just forcing myself to lose cards to this card just so I could, you know, get it on the field and get the taunt effect as it. I'm just going to shortcut and call it. So again, very strong effect. I get why it has the ascend on it, but until white gets something that allows them to consistently draw cards, or if you have a splash that allows you like depths or something, right, that just gets a ton of cards, that's fine too. So this does have a very, very heavy cost for white. And then it's level 1, 2, and 3. During opponent's attack step, you may select one of your opponent's spirits at the start of the step. If possible, that spirit must attack first. So that does matter. The attacking first can actually really create some interesting sequencing that your opponent has to respect. Like, for example, if they have a Frizzitol on the board from the yellow starter deck, the one that says if one of your 2-cost spirits or less dies during combat, you get to draw a card, right? You can force that thing to attack first so they don't get a bunch of value by trying to swing out the rest of the board and cut off their draw engine. So yes, you're going to have a lot of 3 costs anyway, so like you're going to always have something in your deck you can sacrifice to this so you can actually play Turbo Rex. But it's one of those things that, at least at first, glance of it, unless we were expecting a very heavy, aggro meta where you really want to try to break up the board and force your opponent's engines to come offline because you have something you can block with, then like it's fine, but it feels kind of bad when it only has 5k, power, because you're not going to be able to put additional cores on it, right? It's just that one. So getting up to 8k is a pretty good number though, and then 9k at the level 3. And then what's important too is at level 2 and 3, when it attacks, select one of your opponent's spirits that does not have a send on them. So again, shocker, Turbo Rex and Nova, return to their hand. So I like that this one's a little bit more of a open bounce, which if we then go back to things like Buffalong Bill and some of the other like Mechatrice, right? There is a sequencing here where it's like you're playing all these like 7 or less cost white spirits, trying to play like a more mid-rangey style of deck and just bounce a bunch of stuff to their hand after chipping away their blockers for Rex. So like that's another idea. But at the same time, it's like those are a lot of 6 and 7 costs that this one is a Machine B, so it will count for the City Nexus that we're going to talk about later. But Buffalong Bill isn't, for example, and unless you have some type of ramp engine built in, it's going to be kind of hard to get all these spirits online and have enough cores on them to get their effects, right? Because I think Buffalong Bill was 4 cores on him. This is requiring at least 3 on him. And then Mechatrice was level 2, I think. So, right, just for those 3 spirits, which would admittedly bounce a lot of cards, it's a very expensive just for those 3 units. So you like have to end the game if that's what you're going for. And maybe you do. If they don't have a burst and they don't have the Ice Shield in hand, yeah, you could just win. Another 3 drop, because again, there's so many of them to choose from. We have Pegasycone, which is a wonderful, wonderful artwork, but level 1, 2, and 3, armor red and purple. And then the interesting part is during the opponent's attack step, it has a soul core on it. It can block your opponent's spirits with 2 or fewer cores on them, even if exhausted. So it's important because this is not a level restriction otherwise or cost restriction. This is just a flat block if it has 2 or fewer cores on them. So this allows you to protect yourself against like your traditional like yellow go wide strategies, but then also late game, if you're a purple opponent, for example, just was able to pick up a bunch of cards through various effects, now you at least have some type of protection on the board. Heaven forbid they have a curse unit, right? That would ruin this plan, but a 7k blocker can be pretty good. And then with suppression, if you just really need that power bump, which you're probably running in white anyways, it can go up to 10k or even 11k with the Nexus as well. So there's a lot of battle tricks that this can kind of help play off. Again, it's a 3 cost, so it goes for Turbo Rex. It's an early drop you probably want to play anyways. Can't be burned off by Landmine. It is only 2k at level 1, but again, sometimes you're probably just going to take the early trades anyways and be okay with that, so you can stall to the late game. So love this card. I think it does a lot, and the level 2 or 3 effect might be a little bit expensive for what we see, but it's nice to have something that can at least give you some multi-blocks or force your opponent to attack differently, which can also shape the game quite a bit. Talking about now some big boys. 8 costs, 4 reduction, Mecha Beast Fortress Numengard, I believe is how you pronounce that. So when destroyed by an opponent, again, this is a blanket effect. This is not so core depletion, deadly balance, all that stuff. It's going to trigger it. Draw 3 cards, place 3 cores from your void into your reserve. So again, very expensive unit here, but it's really interesting that at level 1, it's going to be 7k. A lot of decks are just going to be able to swing under or past this and not care and make it really difficult to trigger. But if your opponent is playing like a curse heavy deck or something, drawing 3 cards is exactly what you want to be doing and getting to ramp 3. So again, it's another one of those things where it's like, I really like this as a sideboarding option, or maybe you played as a 2-of just to have it. But what's really nice is that secondary effect. Perform a refresh step after your attack step. This effect may only be used once per turn. So refresh step allows you to be aggressive, allows you to spend your cores, and then all of them are going to come back out of your reserve, right? So it gives you access to magic on your next turn, and that might be enough to kind of chip away the resources. Again, because this guy's a 10k that's going to be swinging. That's a pretty big boy. But again, I really love the effect. It's going to be, if you expect like a purple heavy meta, I think this card slaps. Obviously, it gets a little bit worse depending on what else other people are playing, where yellow is just going to say, hey, that dude can't block. And then it's like, all right, well, good game, I guess. But again, that's kind of a balancing thing, as it were. But I really want to live in a world where this card's really good, because I just love the artwork, love the effect, and it is very, very strong, even if it requires a certain meta to revolve around it. Moving on to a 5-cost 2 reduction, Buster Fenrir Cannon, another machine beast. When the spirit blocks at level 2 and 3, return all of your opponent's spirits that cost 2 or fewer to their hand. Again, absolutely insane sideboarding card. Pretty terrible main deck in a lot of situations, right? Unless you know that your meta is going to be very heavy curse and very heavy, right? Even like Boa is a 3-cost even, so like that's very limited. Anyways, I'm gonna use a curse example because it's still the best one that we have, or the 2-cost aggro out of yellow. This card doesn't do much for you. So again, this is where like part of my frustration came in, where it's like you get rewarded if you have some big brain meta play that you make, but then like your average deck building sessions do feel kind of poor, because again, at least for right now, there's no consistent draw engine for it. And if you guess wrong, you know, in terms of what you play, and if you draw this game 1 against your opponent, it's going to feel so defeating. It's just going to be a terrible draw. It doesn't have like even 8K for 5. Like, I guess that can get there in some cases for a chump blocker, but there's probably just better stuff that you're doing in main deck. And then sometimes especially if we see a slower meta, it does nothing. Like, so yeah, this is just a very heavy sideboard based card that, again, very strong effect. Don't get me wrong. I mean, think about how much yellow would hate to see this guy. Yes, they have answers to it. Yes, they can make it so it can't block it and what have you. But it does still force the yellow player to play a different type of game, or to wait a couple turns until they find their magic to go combo with like Chain Angel, for example, so this guy can't block. So probably is going to have some headaches for the yellow decks, but otherwise, you know, something that you're just going to leave in the sideboard until who knows when. Good old, okay, I love this little dude. Like, I love otters. I love the stream otter. 3-cost, 1 reduction, machine beast. While the spirit blocks, it gains 4,000. Yeah, like just a super solid like early game blocker, and probably that's all you care about. I really like that it can go up to a 7K block for only 2 cores. Like, or I guess technically 8K, because you're going to be playing that Nexus anyways in this style of deck. So if you just need a go tall blocker, that sure seems fine. Of course, the downside here is it is only a 3K before blocking. So something like a Burning Force, if your opponent's trying to be aggressive, or like Andromeda, there's a lot of stuff that just straight up kill Landmine, right? That just straight up kills this anyways. So that can be a little bit awkward. And this is like, okay, maybe you just sideboard out against red and bring in some other 3-cost. I'm not sure like how relevant like a more solid mid-range red option is going to be. It's probably good if we see that, but ultimately, because it has like the pre-combat lower BP, I think it's gonna be pretty difficult for this card to find a home depending on how the meta shakes out. More armor and more on-block effects. 4-cost, 2 reduction, Cannon, Beast Mech, Laumile. 1 and 2 armor purple, and when the spirit blocks, select one of your opponent's spirits to cost 2 or fewer and return to the top of their deck. So this one's a bit more interesting because it does stifle their draw. Now, again, if they're like red or purple, it probably doesn't matter. If they're yellow, again, you might just bounce one of their guys that lets them draw another card anyways, so that doesn't help. But if it has like a, you know, if you're going against purple, which again has the armor, so it's really good for that, and you just want to bounce something with curse, just so this guy lives and doesn't die to the curse while stifling their draw, that's fine. You want to like draw out the game until they hit their Maduke anyways. But again, this is very anti-purple, very medium to poor everywhere else. And is that good enough ultimately to make this a main deck consideration, or is it fighting for room in the sideboard where then it has to compete for the, you know, either better overall or better in certain situations, burst cards that you might want to play instead? And there's only a 10-card sideboard, and yes, I've said it a lot, but I'll say it again. There's a lot of sideboard cards that we've seen and would need to consider for. So another one that just, I get it's a balancing thing, but I know that like if there's a lot of purple, someone can get rewarded by putting all this purple hate into their main and sideboard, and then obviously do well and win from that way, because that is what white does. It's a defensive color. It wants to reward people for making the right meta calls and all that stuff. But again, it's something that takes away from a lot of the uniqueness that we've seen in all the other colors, where at least for this set one that we're going to have, white is like, okay, here's just a bunch of white good stuff that kind of all flows together and gets meshed together, and maybe the difference is in the sideboard. So don't love it, obviously, for cost. So it is an earlier play that we get. It does go up to 5K, which can be nice, or 6K with the Nexus. But ultimately, it's like, does this even fit room in the sideboard? I'm not sure. And then we do have our big boy, Armored Dragon Ship Enterprise, or Turtle Ship. 8 costs with 4 reduction. At levels 1, 2, and 3, it has armor red, purple, and white. When the spirit blocks, you get to refresh it at level 2 and 3. And then at level 3 for 4 cards, all your spirits gain armor red, purple, and white. So this card in the mirror match is going to be an absolute nightmare because it's going to shut off the answers in white. You can't deplete it with purple, right? It's yellow is going to have some BP shrinking magic, I'm sure that we're going to see, but then again, it's at 12K, so you're probably not shrinking it. You just have to make it so it can't block. And what's interesting, though, is yes, this is a 12K blocker, which can be really beefy and really good, and the armor obviously makes it good for your opponent. But this guy's not finishing the game. Like, yes, you'll just have to wait and grind it out and wait till you maybe draw like that Mech Lord or maybe like an Elk and, you know, really wait until like turn 30 to actually win the game. And at least for some of the other stuff we've seen in the other colors, that's not exciting. Like, that feels too slow. Like, hey, thank you, white, for the best magic in the game so far. And obviously it's going to help out yellow a lot, but this guy is obviously a very good card. Don't get it. Don't mishear any part of this. This card slaps. It's very strong, very defensive, but it's not really doing anything all that exciting. And you're otherwise just have a 12K vanilla that you're attacking with. And again, maybe that's enough to chip away the board. Maybe you eventually play a second one, which counts as a double blocker. Like, there has to be something else that you're doing with this, or you're just playing like the old Himafab where you wait for your opponent to deck out and you're going to go to draw. You're going to draw to the time and just draw out and lose every round. Like, that's no good either. So really, again, I loved Elk. At least DMD can close games. I get this is a strong card, but it just doesn't do anything for how late in the game it's going to be when your opponent is going to be playing things like their Maduke. They're going to be playing things like their Mika and comboing off for big spells. Nova Dragon, they're going to be able to heal up and attack you with a 12K. They probably have like Scorched Battlefield pushing it to like 14K because they drew like 20 more cards than you over the course of the game. And it's like, all right, I guess I'm just dead to Nova and his big attack, you know, his big BP. So it's like you're giving your opponent time to have all the outs in the world. So again, it's very curious to see where white is going to end up, you know, a month from now once more testing gets in. Moving into more early drops, again, 3 costs, so it does combo off of Turbo Rex's Ascend. Snow Flocken for 2 reduction, Armor Red at 1 and 2, and when the spirit blocks, select one of your opponent's spirits with Confront or Curse and return it to its owner's hand. This one's interesting because it can get rid of like one of the higher end curses, like the, what is it, 7-drop in purple, so it can make it where you can block again. It does cost 4 cores, which is a lot for this effect. And again, it is a when block, so things like Ear can ramp a, I forget what is it, Forest Princess or Priestess Ear or whatever it is the one that lets you ramp a core. So like maybe it's good for that, just so you can start ramping out additional cores. In Confront, there's a lot of stuff that can actually just bounce, you know, Confront. And they can't use a red spell to kill it because it has Armor Red at level 1. So again, very solid card. This one, again, there's going to be a lot of red and purple, I'm sure. So this one you might be able to sneak away with just putting it main deck anyways, because it's really good where it's good. But again, maybe it's like a, you know, a 2 of main deck, 2 of sideboard situation because it does just hit a lot. So love this funky little dude. 3 costs, you can play it early, helps with your cost reductions. It's an Armored Dragon, which doesn't matter for family names yet, but could matter in the near future. 4 cost reduction, Valkyrie Mist. Now, this one has been spicy to me. So it's an android, but when summoned, select one of your opponent's spirits that costs 7 or fewer and return it to hand. It is a 1,000 and a 3,000. So the BP is very, very low, but this is more of like, okay, are we going to get into some type of, you know, more aggressive strategy in white, because this only effectively costs 1 if you have a bunch of Nexus on the field or just other spirits. And if we can find a draw engine for white, and again, this is probably the reason why they don't, hitting multiple 7 or 6 cost in a turn and returning them to your opponent's hand is going to be such an insane swing because they just can't redeploy all those. And it's only 1,000 BP, but if it hits their life, it hits their life. And that's kind of all you need sometimes. So at least in some of the like early ideas I had for like more aggressive strategies, it didn't quite find a spot that I was happy with. So I'm not saying it's all that good yet, but I definitely see a world where hitting 7 costs is going to be really, really good and set some like those mid-range and control styles back where it's very hard for them to come back off of like 2 of these in a turn, for example, and just chip down their life in 2 turns. So might not be something that we're all that excited or see all that much in set 1, but this card definitely slaps and hits a lot. I'm very excited to see where it ends up. Ice Maiden MK2 is an android with 3 cost, 1 reduction. At level 2, it has armor purple and yellow. So this one is interesting because it's one of, I think, 2 cards off the top of my head that have armor yellow, which means it would stop things like Chain Angel from preventing it to block. So again, this is one of those things like if you expect a lot of yellow in your local meta and you're playing Turbo Rex already anyways, and you just want more fodder for him, great. Put 4 of this in your main deck and you're probably fine. But in the reality of nature with how Angels versus 2 cost decks are going to be quite different. Maybe this is something you just put in your sideboard, but it's a great option to have for yellow when you normally do struggle against yellow because they can shut off your when block effects through Lakeside, or just say stuff can't block, right? Or just shrink it and make it, you know, in this case, like a Drowsy Fumes would kill it if it was only level 1, but it has 4K at level 2, so it might be able to survive that way. Again, great card for sideboard, and that's cool and everything, but otherwise just not something to really get excited about. King Herald, 5, 2 cost reduction android. During opponent's attack step, refresh this spirit when one of your spirits with armor blocked. So this is interesting because like you can attack with it. It's only a 6K, so maybe not that exciting. And then when your armor spirits blocks, now it's suddenly a surprise blocker. That might work out in some scenarios, right? Again, if we find like more aggressive, like a red-white deck, I guess, and then having the option for a couple armor blockers that matter. We'll see. So again, this could be more of just like a heavy meta call armor style of deck, and then you can also be aggressive with it. But I think overall the effect is going to be a bit too narrow and too high costed for this card to really matter. So we'll have to see where it ends up. The artwork though is sick. Like I love this funky little dude, or big dude, I guess I should say, right? It has a cape and everything. Like looks sick, but you know, not all that exciting, at least at first pass. Head Snow Librarian Saga, 2 cost, 1 reduction. When the spirit attacks or blocks, place a core from your trash to your reserve. If you place a soul core into your reserve with this effect, this spirit gains 3,000 BP during this turn. So this is crazy because it is a soul core retrieval effect, which means then we could play combo it with like Chain Angel to get multiple spell uses, make multiple, you know, things unblockable for the turn, or make it so they can't block, I should say. Like, this is not a white card. Like, this is one of those things where it's like, why does this exist? And even within white itself, right, other than if we go back to Dermdina, right, he spends his soul core, but then there's like nothing else that you really like need to spend the soul core on. So like once you spend it once, that's fine. Unless you're trying to like leave it up for a suppression. So like, yeah, cool. Like this goes up to what, 6K? Like, cool, I guess. This is probably one of those things that you're making unblockable anyways, but this again feels more like it's a card that's meant to go in other colors, and I kind of wish they would have just expanded on a bit more with what white wants to be doing with its own like Machine Beast and mechas. That it definitely feels a little bit bad. I love the idea of this card. I love the idea of getting our soul core back. I love the idea of getting use it for a couple turns or twice in a turn. To get multiple effects, like the Chain Angel, like you just keep going back to, because I'm really excited for yellow. But why, right? Why does this exist? Like, oh, I paid for the, what is it? The draw off of Heavenly Piercing Castle Nexus, whatever it is on the starter deck, right? And then like, oh, now I want to use it for suppression. Cool, but like that's a super narrow case. Like you don't care to use it for that. So this one really confused me, admittedly. Like I get the effect is strong. Obviously getting soul core back is very strong. I get all that, but it doesn't do anything that white wants to be doing other than like suppression is like the one key card that matters for that effect. So meh. I'm curious to see where this ends up, because this is a card that like it probably doesn't matter for set 1, but set 2, 3, 4, 5, what have you, this could do some very disgusting, crazy things. So keeping this on my radar, not excited for it in set 1, but we'll see where it lands. 3 cost, 2 reduction, Head Ice Made Fula. 1, 2, and 3, your opponent's effects cannot remove cores from this spirit or any spirit with a soul core on it. So again, very heavily focused for sideboarding. Anti-purple helps you keep around your a couple of your spirits if you want to be more aggressive so they can't core deplete it. But again, I'm not so sure that white has enough cards that it cares about for that type of strategy. So I love both Ice Princess cards, as well as this combos very well with the 5-drop out of the starter deck that you want to have the soul core on it. And like that style of stuff is okay, but I'm not sure that with those 2 cards, like are those 2 things good enough for like the generic white deck where I want to make sure I'm keeping something alive so I can bounce it? Or are we just saving it for like, oh, this is going to be a different deck entirely, right? Like bouncing spirits off of the other Ice Princess is going to be very strong. I think it's like Bridget is the name of the card. But other than that, it's like, again, remove cores, that's strictly anti-purple. So sideboard it, I guess. But again, there's so many good bursts out of sideboard that we can have that it's going to feel a little bit rough to find the spot for this one. And then finally getting into our Nexus cards, moving on from there. Fortress, Metropolis, Nomen City, 4 cost, 2 reduction. During your main step, when you summon a Machine Beast spirit card, so this counts for all of your key spirits that we mentioned, both Turbo Rex and Elk. This counts as a triple reduction, but more importantly is that secondary effect. Actually, like, don't get me wrong, triple reduction is nice. During your opponent's turn, all your spirits gain 1,000 BP. This actually helps quite a bit against red and making sure that your spirits hit past that 3,000 and 6,000 threshold. And then if you have 2 of these, it just locks them out completely. So yes, they're going to probably have Andromeda. Yes, they're probably going to have Burning Force to ruin your day. But like this card, like getting to keep this card on the board against red does a lot. So this is one of those cards where like all the white decks want to use this, and like naturally then I want to, you know, shift my attention towards either Turbo Rex or Elk because I want the first part of this Nexus to matter and I want it to count for a triple reduction. So this card absolutely slaps. I cannot wait to see where Machine Beasts go. Again, it might not find its home in set 1, but maybe like set 2 would be really good, and we'll see how it goes from there. But absolutely playing 4 of these in pretty much every white deck that I have going forward. Both the first and the second effect are very, very good. And if we don't see Machine Beasts starting off great right away, they definitely will be getting more support either in the event pack that we're going to have for Vegas, or the store shop tournament promos are probably going to be exclusive, or the what is it called? The core set has a promo, and then on top of that, we have the EX-01 set, which comes out in June, which has more exclusive promos. So there's a lot of opportunities for more Machine Beasts to be printed in the very near future after launch. Another card that, quite honestly, I didn't see how crazy this card was until I started playing it. And yes, sequencing does matter. Yes, in certain matchups, it's going to be a lot better or a lot worse. But Infinity Mothership is your 5 cost with 2 reduction. During your opponent's attack step, at the start step, place all cores from your trash into your reserve, which is insane. So this single Nexus allows white to both actively deploy its board and get multiple spirits on the board, while then also recovering all your cores so you can still play Magic without weakening your spirits. And in the mid game, this mattered a lot, actually. So yes, it was like those more like mid-range or control matchups, but just getting to always deploy something and always put another spirit on the board while also always having enough cores to play suppression for full value. Wow, like this card just does so much. And then on top of that, you know, as I said when we were talking about the spirits, like there's already good enough mechas that we want to be playing, but during your core step, if you control a mecha spirit, gain 2 cores instead of 1. So now it's also ramping, which helps you stick your things like Elk or a bigger Enterprise. So again, I really wish it was a 4 cost just so you could play it on turn 1. I get why it's not, because it'd make you so you can ramp a whole turn earlier, but really do love this card. Like, it has done so much in early testing for white that I would expect to see a lot of decks that say, okay, if we don't want to rely on the, Glass Bear, Forest Priestess Ear, and Holy Elixir side of ramp, And I also want to just play into things like dual mecha Dermdyna. I want to have ramp. I want to have all my cores come back. Like, it's very easy to splash like 3 different mechas into your deck to consistently get this effect, or to threaten consistently having your effect, right? Maybe your opponent then tries to remove your mecha so you don't get the effect instead of deploying one of their bigger threats. So this Nexus is a very real threat, and when I find like the right ratios for it and where I find the exact list I want to use with it, it's going to be very scary. Getting the magic back, or getting extra magic each turn, is pretty crazy. More Nexus, 3-cost Rocket City with 1 reduction. During opponent's attack step, when one of your spirits blocks, it gains 1,000 BP. So like, cool, not that exciting, but like, hey, plus 1,000 BP, why not? That does matter in some scenarios. But during opponent's turn, when your opponent draws outside of their draw step, they must discard a card. So what's important about this is things like Volcanic Canyon doesn't count for it. Things like, I think the yellow cards are like reveal and put in a hand, right? It's not like you're drawing the top card, if I'm not mistaken. There's like the wording, it really matters on this one. And what I'm trying to get at, it's like specifically for, was it charge draw, star blessed draw, and the white Nexus, I guess, technically, right? It's a bit more narrow than what you think it is. So again, the first effect is just kind of It's a 3-cost, you can play it early, and unless you're playing it's a full-on combo deck that's like 4 charge draw, 4 star blessed draw, like this kind of just feels really terrible. And again, we are already very, very tight on our sideboarding slots, so it's absolutely a meta call that this is very much going to be a, hey, I'm playing 4 of it because I really want to target this deck, or I'm playing 0 of it, right? And it just comes down to what that's going to look like. So really curious to see where this lines up from like a meta standpoint, but ultimately you're going to rate it really, really low for now because the other Nexuses in white do so much for you, and our sideboard is going to be just jam-packed with other cards that something like Combo Nova would really have to be a large part of the meta for us to put that in our sideboard. And then from there, 4-cost, 2 reduction, Forest of Steel Leaves. At levels, I keep going at level 0 by instinct, but level 1 for 0 cores. If you have a burst card set, your white Nexus cannot be destroyed by the effects of your opponent's red spirits or magic. Now, this one is a very spicy sideboard card because it can make sure that things like our Infinite Mothership can stay alive, or our Machine Beast Nexus if we need it to, as long as we have a burst set. And spoiler, white has a ton of burst cards that we want to be playing anyways, so this is going to stick around for us. And then the second part, when one of your spirits is destroyed by your opponent, select one of their Nexus and return to their hand. So this could bounce something like a Scorched Battlefield. This could bounce something like Depths out of purple. So it does have like more than just like the anti-red part of it, but it is very much a, okay, combo. And like I said, we just talked about with the Rocket City, a lot of these are like, hey, we just really want to have an anti-red sideboard, and it's great that you have that option, but you also can't be like, oh, I'm just going to run, what would that be, 4, 8, 12, 16? 16 Nexus cards and hope for the best, right? Like, you have to play other stuff to actually survive with blockers or close out the game. So very strong effect. Obviously, we're going to be playing a lot of burst cards, but this is another one where it might be far too niche to be relevant from a meta call, because then if you don't like see any red all day, it's just a very dead card otherwise. I don't know what to say. Absolute Ice Shield. Card slaps. If you are new to Battle Spirits, this is one of the most important and best cards in set 1, period. It's called Burst Wall, but the actual literal translation of the card for kanji to English is Absolute Ice Shield, so it's a proper name. But set it as a burst. When you lose a life, place a core from your reserve into your life. You may then activate the flash effect. So for 4 costs and 1 reduction and the attack step, this single card will shut down aggro decks, shut down OTK decks, and at least for white, for example, they don't have a lot of draw. So there are times where they have to consider, oh, am I placing my Absolute Ice Shield down? I'm going to activate this turn. I'm going to try to go for like a suppression for multi-blocks, because suppression is like Absolute Ice Shield 5 through 8, basically, because it can also just stop your opponent cold. It's one of those things like they have to choose, where it's like, if you're playing purple or red and you just have infinite draw that they do, you're like, okay, play it, set a burst. It's like mid to late game. You have infinite cores. You can always pay for it off your spirits. Like, oh, yeah, Absolute Ice Shield number 3. Okay, cool. Add the attack, heal 1. Go to my next turn. Oh, look at me. I drew 20 cards off depths this game. Set my 4th Ice Shield. And like, you just kind of play this back and forth of just like, who runs out of Ice Shield first. And like there's other ways to play around it, or like put more focus on removing your opponent's spirits, like things of that nature. But this card's a rare. Please, even if you don't play white, buy 8 of this, like as week 1, just so you have 2 play sets to put in 2 different decks. The card is going to see play forever. It's not going to get banned. It's actually a very important defensive card to keep the format healthy. I know how crazy it might sound based on what I just said, but this card is absolutely necessary for the game and does help make a healthier meta. It's a little odd right now because we don't have things like burst interaction. We don't have things like burst spirits, which are like a very good consideration as well to have something in your burst other than this effect. But then also, you can just have this in your hand and then just play it for the flash effect right out, right? If you want to bait your opponent to like, hey, I don't have a burst set, oh no, I might die, to cause them to like overextend and then like do a really bad attack pattern, you can play haha gotcha on their like second to last attack, go down to 1 life, and then make sure that there's nothing that can kill you, right? So there's a lot of use in this card, both from playing it from the burst so that your health stays neutral versus keeping it in your hand and using it as like a key bluff strategy. So card's very good. It's going to see play forever. It's just great. 4 cost, 3 reduction is Regain. Main flash, select one of your spirits that is not currently attacking and refresh it. So this card's really spicy because, again, as we talked about the Bounce 7 Android, as we talked about during Dyna, there is like this aggressive style of deck that you could just combo off, make multiple things unblockable, have a couple regains to like restand your other guys that are still unblockable, because I'm pretty sure the wording was still on the turn, and then just like attack that way. But more importantly is we know Luster exists in yellow that lets you just cast magic and then bounce it back to your hand. And then we also have Mika, who lets you play all magic for free during the attack step, and this is flash. So if you have Mika and 2 Luster Spirits, you just have now a combo, and this is a very core-heavy investment, obviously, but it's like what yellow is known for. You now have a Regain OTK combo that says, look, these 2 angels are going to be able to attack. They're only 6,000 power, so you can still block them. You can still interact with them. Don't get me wrong. Here's these 2 spirits. They're going to threaten multiple attacks if I have a way to like buff them or save them anyways. And all this magic I'm playing for free that I could have in my hand with like BP reduction effects or what have you. Oh, by the way, that's also free. And it's also going back to my hand after the combat ends. So if like you have Regain plus like 2 Drowsy Fumes, if only because like that's the only card we have, right? The minus 2K. Now these angels are effectively 10K swinging units that always are going to restand after each battle. Yeah, that's pretty nuts, actually. So, again, Ice Shield exists. There's going to be things like bouncing the Mika during combat. You can do, Core Theft during combat if you really want to, because purple's always going to have the removal there. Red has access to... Now I'm blanking on what it was going to be, right? But there's a lot of different ways to interact with it, but it is a way to close out the game. So this is a very, very strong magic that... I don't think it's going to find a room in set 1 for white mechas and like that more like hopefully aggro style of deck, but there's a lot of crazy stuff that this can do in yellow, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. Speaking of bursts that are very competitive for our deck slots, 5 costs, or sideboard slots, I should say, 5 costs to reduction Counter Sword. When your opponent resolves a when summon effect, select one of your opponent's spirit and return it to the top of their deck. You may pay this card's cost to activate its main effect, which lets you heal 1. So again, against things like Nova, against things like Dark King Snake, cards that you just don't want to see, you're going to put it on top of their deck. So again, in the Nova example, they had to sacrifice a spirit to play it, so they might not have another 6 cost immediately to replay it. Dark King Snake, yes, they're going to just get to play it on the next turn and maybe shrink something else down to 1 again, but it's also making sure that they don't draw another card. So there's a lot of when summon effects that could make a lot of use for this burst, and I could see a lot of people getting caught by this one, because putting it to the top and then the 4 cost mecha that puts it to the bottom of the deck, there's a lot of disruption that white has access to. So this one I really do love as a sideboard option, maybe like a 2 of main deck just to have it if you expect a lot of like when summon style of decks. But yeah, I'm very curious to see how many copies of this card end up getting played within the main and sideboard once we know what the meta shapes up to be. And then my love, my everything, Suppression, 4 cost, 2 reduction, main flash, select 1 spirit. It gains 3,000 BP, which is a lot. And I know this is not going to seem like it until you start playing more, but a 2,000 and a 3,000 buff are basically 2 different cards. So the fact that this buffs by 3,000 is huge. And then if you spend a soul core, which again, white doesn't have a lot of things it cares about for the soul core, so spoiler, you're going to have it, that spirit can block while exhausted during this turn. So again, white is going to have some big beefy units. We saw things like Turbo Rex, which is going to force them to attack with something else first. So this card, again, really goes the distance, at least in early testing, that this was effectively Burst Wall, or again, Absolute Ice Shield, copies 5, 6, 7, and 8 for me, because you play this once, you play the haha got you, my guy's bigger, unless you have like some hard removal, and then they lost their spirit, and now they can't attack with anything else because they would just slam it against a wall and die. So really love this card. It's insanely strong for a common, it feels like, but very much looking forward to picking up foils because the card slaps. Absolutely slaps. Cards that don't slap is Dream Blizzard. 4 costs, 2 reduction, main return all Nexus to their owner's hands, and then main flash, select a spirit, gain 3. So I like the fact that, again, this is modal. So like this is one of those things where if we didn't have sideboards, I'd be like, okay, well, Nexus removal is probably gonna be a really big thing for, let's say, blue or purple, because if they build out like multiple depths and stuff like that. So like, hey, there is like a use for this where you might be excited to play it. And this might come back for us when blue gets introduced and we see like the mill deck and destroying Nexus cards. So there is a use for this, and does lead me to believe that we might actually see blue next, because this is like a very, you know, blue, I guess blue and purple and maybe some yellow too. Like this does hit a lot, but it's not as Nexus focused as maybe we'd expect yet until we get blue. So maybe blue next confirmed. But again, otherwise, because we have sideboard, because we have other things that we're focusing on, this card probably just doesn't make the cut ever within set 1 until we see more of the meta develop and get new cards to support it and want to use it. So with that, my favorite cards from the set, and again, I know that I try not to use a spirit, an X-Rare spirit, because they all kind of are stuck where they're at, but I got to give it up to Enterprise. You know, I'm honestly really not excited for this card today, but I will probably be excited for this card closer to set 2 and or when set 2 drops. Armor, granting an Anthem armor effect for red, purple, and white is very, very strong. Whew, and I'm sure it's going to find a home somewhere. Again, all the spirits in white, I'm just like not that excited for up front. So that one's a little bit harder to pick. For our Nexus, I'm going to go with Infinity Mothership. Again, at least in early testing, getting the cores back every time so you can always deploy your board or always develop your board and get your cores back and have stuff from Magic. It just felt so good. And there's mechas that you want to play anyway. So sometimes you just go, oops, I'm going to ramp an extra core. And like getting that even just in 2 turns puts you so far ahead. It's great. And then for Magic, I would, you know, I almost joked and I was going to like put something there and then like, oh, JK, it's going to be absolute. Like, no, the card's just great. It's absolutely insane. So with that, like I said, I really hope that I get more time to test, and I'm going to do a gameplay video. The first one's going to be white, so we're going to see where it ends up. But at least with my very, 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 very early impressions, it does leave a little bit to be desired. But I love these cards. I love the more control style of deck. So I really want to focus on building something with it. So hopefully I will have something to show for it sometime next week when we do another video. So we have... This one's obviously out of the way. We have the yellow set review, which will happen probably later in the week sometime. We're still waiting on the Vegas event information. So yes, we know there's going to be a $100,000 cash event in Vegas, but we're waiting to see more info. So please look forward to it. But other than that, I'm probably going to take this week off from gameplay, really just try to focus on building some decks that aren't just absolutely garbage, and then have some stuff up for you next week. So with that, let me know what your 3 favorite white cards from History of Dawn or BSS-01 set 1 is. You know, pick your favorite spirit, Nexus, and Magic to let me know in the comments below. But otherwise, hopefully you have a wonderful rest of the week. Stay hydrated, my friends, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.